let's invite up to speak our first speaker, Tom McMillin, former state legislator, the tremendous state legislator, and a great member of the State Board of Education. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom.
Thank you, Dennis. It's an honor to be asked to come and talk to this esteemed group about what we're doing on the state board. I've been there since January. As you know, Nikki Snyder and I won the election in November, so the board is now 4-4 for Republicans, 4 Democrats, and we serve for 8-year terms. I'll be on there for quite a while, and I think it's an interesting mix, and I've been able to. There really are areas that we agree with in Democrats. There are some of the most liberal Democrats on that board that we have worked together in areas that I think are very positive. The main area, and you know, the state board meets once a month. We get a stipend of like $100 a meeting, so and our mileage taken care of. So it's a few $1,000s a year. But we do end up spending time at the schools. When they were looking at closing some schools, about 30 throughout the state, I went with some of my Democrat colleagues and some of the downriver and Detroit schools and other areas, and really tried to understand the situation. I mean, there's some tough areas. I mean, there's kids that are 3rd graders walking a mile to school in the dark, you know, in the middle of Detroit, where we wouldn't want to be caught. You know, I mean, there's just a lot of things, and if you close some of those schools, they walk 1.5 miles then instead of a mile. And so there's really, it's good to really get in there and understand what's really going on. But the main thing that we dealt with, and I fought this in the legislature, and it might take a little longer, and I won't go into too much detail, but it's about high stakes testing. And right now, our standards are Common Core aligned, and we all know that, and one of the reasons I got elected is to fight that, and we are fighting it. But one of the ways you fight it is to make it so that locals don't have to follow it very much. I mean, if there was, you know, and that's where high stakes testing comes in. If it's high stakes where a school could be shut down if they're not doing well on the Common Core aligned test, well then everybody has to be faithful to the Common Core. No matter how dumb it is, no matter how bad it is, you've got to teach that, or else your school may get shut down, or you might lose your job as a teacher. So my efforts, and really, it's not a very sexy way to talk about education and my position, but I want to get rid of power from Lansing. We have a principle in the Republican Party of local control. Who knows best about what is needed for the child but the people at the local level, the teacher, the parent? That's where the power should reside. And ever since Proposal A, which I was one of the few Republicans that opposed it in '94, the money now goes to Lansing, and they put all kinds of strings. Before that, there wasn't as much of that. So really, to what I'm going to talk about is really not about what we've done, because it's about what I've been able to get rid of, or to try to lessen the power of the state. And so really it has to do with, before we got on there, the Democrats were in charge 6-2, and they kind of were allowing the MDE to just push what's called, well, under ESSA, Every Student Succeed Act, the federal, this took over No Child Left Behind, and it was meant to push more power back from the federal government to the states. And to some degree it was, but we are one of the few states that are really testing that. One of the big things is accountability, and the federal government says you have to have an accountability system, and most states are going to what's called an A to F, where you grade the schools primarily based on the state assessment of how they're following the standards. And here again, the Common Core standards in all the other states virtually. So the feds are, but Michigan, and that's the way Michigan was heading before Nikki and I got on the board. When I got on, I realized that there wasn't that much passion in the other board members for this stuff, and I fought A to F, and I want a dashboard, and that's what we're going to have. I feel that what we do is, as a state, we can give information. We can say, here's how they did on the Common Core aligned test in growth, because sometimes you want to see how much are the kids growing. Are they growing more than a year in math and in reading and literature? And then also, how proficient are they? Are they strong and proficient? But again, here again, it's Common Core proficiency. So those are two of the metrics, but also parents, we're hearing from them saying we also are interested in the student-teacher ratio. We're interested in extracurricular opportunities. We're interested in safety. Some areas, that's a big deal, is how safe are our schools? Access to the technology, time spent in the fine arts, music, physical education, I mean, I even talked about, there's a lot of studies that say, kids, especially in the lower grades, need recess. I mean, when you look at what the elite schools are doing, they're not following Common Core. They are giving a liberal arts education, and many of us may not like Mark Cuban, but he's a billionaire. He knows something about what's coming in the future. And he says that really, he says STEM is not the big thing. I mean, artificial intelligence and technology are going to do a lot of those jobs. It's the liberal arts. It's the creativity and more humanness. I mean, I follow a guy named Dr. Young Zhao, who really turned me around on a lot of these education issues. And he said that we need to become more human because, that's what's going to be valuable in the future, is creativity. And so, and the elite schools know that. That's what they're giving their children. And so why should we not be pushing more of a broad ability for kids to get more than just math and reading? They certainly need a good level. They need to understand those very clearly. But there's also a place for a lot of the fine arts and the liberal arts and the histories and things. And what happens when you have a high stakes test, if it's not going to be on the test, they go away. So you're seeing a lot of the band and music and drama and literature and things going away in the classrooms because they're not on the test, and the test was high stakes. So that is my big effort, and we actually won. They were heading that direction, and to many people's astonishment, I pushed for a vote, and the board voted to stop heading towards A to F as an accountability system and go to a dashboard. So we are going to tell parents factual information about schools and let them decide what is important. Is proficiency, right now the way the A to F goes, you say 40% is proficiency, 30% is growth, and it's all based on the test almost. And it's somebody in Lansing deciding what's important for parents. But I feel it's best to let parents decide what's the most important for their schools. So it's no small thing. If you talk to any of your superintendents, they will say this was a big change, and they all will know that we were heading in one direction, and after McMillin and Snyder got on, things turned. There was a vote, and abruptly it changed, and we're one of the few states that are actually not doing A to F. They all had to file their plans, and ours has not been approved by Betsy DeVos yet. We're expecting that in the next couple weeks. But, and we're the only state that's actually spending a ton of time with parent focus groups. What do these parents want to see on the dashboard? What information do they want to know about their schools? And so that's an area that we have done, and again, we meet once a month. We do pass standards, and we have looked at standards. I've actually stopped a couple of them. Debbie knows about that. They had a physical education standards, but there was some areas where they were pushing the transgender agenda, and I basically forced a vote to try and get rid of it. It didn't, because it stopped 4-4, and so then when they tried to hold the vote for the standards, it stopped 4-4. It did not pass. And so, we are causing some influence in the standards. I also talk to Colbeck quite regularly, because the social studies standards are getting teed up. And he was on a subcommittee with him and Michael Warren, Judge Warren, but it was mainly liberals, and they were not listened to very well. But we've made it clear that, look, those guys also need to be okay with the standards, and so they're holding them up. That wouldn't have happened if the board was 6-2. And there are fundamental things like, I know Colbeck is upset about calling us a democracy. He wants it to be a constitutional republic. And he is kind of holding firm on that issue that, in these standards, we're not going to call the United States a democracy. And so, there's areas, but it gets obviously a lot deeper than that. Finally, I want to mention that that there is an effort. So that's the state board. We just met a couple of days ago, and we are. I am really pushing also. I think the state board should be involved in these quote-unquote failing schools. Again, the state is saying you're failing if you're not doing well on the Common Core line test. So I'm not sure they're failing. Quite frankly, if they're actually doing what's best for kids, they may not be doing what's best for the Common Core. They may not do all that well. But at any rate, there are some that are in very difficult areas. There's all kinds of issues. And so I really think as a state board we should focus on those and not, just that should be, if the state is saying that they're failing or they're doing very poorly, what can we do? And I think part of it might be taking our hands off and hearing from them what they think their children need in those areas and what would be best for their kids, and not just always a top-down. The final thing is HJRM is coming up for a hearing tomorrow that would eliminate the State Board of Education. In the House Education Committee, Tim Kelly is pushing this. The chairman, he's about ready to leave and go to Lansing or Washington under Betsy DeVos. Is going to be appointed as a deputy secretary for workforce development, I think, in education. In the next, I mean, it's imminent in the next few weeks or month or so. But he's been wanting to have this conversation, and so he just posted it today, late, a few hours ago, so I'm not actually able to free up and go there, but I'm assuming they want to hear from the state board, so I'm assuming there'll be a second hearing. But I mean, there is this effort to say, let's centralize power, and really, quite frankly, what we have now is the precinct delegates nominate. So remember, I don't know if you remember, a few years ago, we had Republicans on the state board that were pushing Common Core. Well, they came to get re-nominated. They didn't. The convention stood up. You folks stood up and said no. And then from then on, you can't get nominated for dog catcher if you're not against Common Core at the Republican conventions. I mean, but it's because there's some power in the local folks, and so that's how we're nominated. We're elected for 8-year terms, and quite frankly, it's just that the power is separated. It's not in one person. If you put it in with the governor, which is what this constitutional amendment, it has to go to the people, and it has to have 2/3 of the legislature in both chambers approve it, which is highly doubtful, but they might make a shot at it. So that's coming up, and we'll see what that discussion is. I believe that it's best to try to not consolidate power, especially in the area of education. Educational theories come and go, and that's, if you hear from teachers, they'll tell you one thing is that you guys change things all the time for us, and believe me, you put it in the power of one person, and they're trying to do things in sound bites and for the public PR, and not for what's really best. And you're just going to have a mess. It's going to be extremely political, and it's not going to be what's best for kids, but what's best for re-elections and all this other stuff. So I am going to be, we certainly will be opposing it. I think, there's plenty that will step up, and I expect Republicans and Democrats to be opposing this. But, I know Tim was very upset at me and others over stopping Data F. They really like this kind of centralizing power in Washington and Lansing, and so it'll be a debate to have, and we'll see what happens. But those are some of the areas that are going on. Do I take questions? Or
yeah, anybody have, round of applause for sure.
But you folks, a lot of your precinct delegates, state delegates, I mean, you do have an impact. I mean, there's a lot of things. It would have been a lot different, especially on this accountability plan, which I think is a way to free up locals. If there's not as much penalty, and what an A to F means is that a school would be a D or a C. And you could just hear the cries now, we're a C, we gotta be a B. And it's all focused on the test. What's on the test? We gotta get a B, we gotta get a B. And so, that's all it would be, is when you start putting grades to these schools, that's all it is. And that means anything that's not on the test, boy, it just goes to the wayside. So it's just really, by de-emphasizing the high-stakes testing, you really free up locals to do what's best for their community and for the kids there. Debbie?
Well, I just like to say we support your opposition at Stop Common Core, Michigan, to the getting away from voting for the State Board of Ed. And others, we are on a national group in other states that have this. There's many states that have the governor appoint the superintendent of schools and the State Board of Ed. In those states, most of them have given up. The parents have given up trying to stop Common Core because they're so, that way it's totally controlled by the donors and the powers. And what would be better in the state, and I know that Ed McMillin had this bill a couple years ago, is to change our State Board of Ed to be like Texas, Colorado, Alabama, where they elect them by district. And if we could mimic maybe congressional districts,
right.
And that way you would have local representation. You would have mostly Republican because most of our congressional districts are Republican. But it would be a much better grassroots representation. Maybe even elect them in a convention as their instead of a big expensive vote for the primary.
Yep.
That's the right direction. The wrong direction is to get rid of the people's choice.
Right. And this is actually to get rid of the board altogether. And so the governor just appoints the superintendent. There is no board.
Oh my.
Not good, okay.
Oh, well, this gentleman and then you. Yep.
Okay, so you mentioned STEM versus, arts. And,
Liberal arts and
liberal
right.
arts. What about teaching kids how to think?
Right.
Yeah.
Critical thinking,
Right.
philosophy,
Yeah.
rhetoric?
No, this is, yeah, I mean, this is exactly where you gotta go to in philosophy and things that are not on the test and that you can't really test for.
Okay.
We're also seeing, by the way, somebody just was telling me about social emotional learning. I mean, one of their grandkids just had a test at the high school about what their feelings are on homosexual, issues and things like this. And it wasn't anonymous. It was this was a feelings test. Like, what are you feeling? This is totally highly inappropriate. Yes.
Well, I want to thank you for your service on the board. Melissa Bozarday, I have a son in special education, so I've studied the ESSA plan pretty thoroughly.
Yeah.
And so what they did was change the end size from
End size
10
to
to
30.
30.
Yep.
And so transparency is really important in government and education, and that we know what the progress is. Well, so for example, students in special education, with that end size change from 10 to 30, now only 65%, there would be 65% of those schools with special education students that would not have to report based upon that benchmark.
The transparency dashboard, as we are pushing forward, has an end size of 10 for state and special education.
It's 30.
I know in the ESSA plan, but the transparency dashboard that will report on sizes and different, break things down into the groups of students that will include end size of 10. Yes?
Terry Pitbull. Yeah, I was wondering, what's it look like on the horizon for vocational education back in?
Right.
Vocational education, I mean, it is, as we free up, and I really prefer more like essential standards or skinnier standards. We have such minutia. Teachers are just worried about hitting everything that they're supposed to hit and not necessarily given the freedom to do what they think is best in the way they teach. But so freeing up to let locals decide if they want to do that. I certainly have some concerns if they do it too young in life, in the earlier grades. But in the 11th and 12th grades, yeah, I mean, I am not going to try to dictate from on. I'll try to eliminate barriers that don't allow vocational.
Well, to give you an example, computer-aided design is vocation, comes under the vocational heading. Yet the facts are there that indicate that when students do that, their math scores, their reading comprehension skills, critical thinking skills increase far greater than the traditional math class, reading literature class, and yet nobody seems to be paying attention to that. And that can be taught as low as 7th grade. So when they get to 9th and 10th, they can probably have 11th and 12th, maybe metal shop and wood shop where they have power tools and equipment.
I mean, there's always unintended consequences of these things, but I'd like it to be hashed out at the local level. Because if you're giving 7th and 8th graders, you're not giving them something else. And so maybe that something else would be you don't want to do what Europe does where they track kids and they say, you're not too good right now, Johnny, in 5th grade math. So, I think the cashier is about as high as you're going to go. So let's slot you in these areas. So, you want to make sure that you're not limiting, and you want to give them a full education as much as you can. But certainly when they get up to the 11th and 12th grades where they really feel this is my direction, and because how many of us thought we knew what we were going to do? Completely different. So I mean, what you're seeing is more and more that the state is saying, well, this is what society is going to need, or the employers are going to need in a few years. So this is what we want to push kids into. Well, those jobs may not be around. Truck drivers with driverless cars aren't going to be around anymore. So you've been pushing them into that. So you really want a very broad broad education, a liberal arts education, that you can be very flexible. And, you know, so there's a lot of, I could get into all kinds of theory. A couple more, and I'm sure I gotta go, yeah.
Isn't that the purpose of the data that they're collecting on everyone, from the cradle until the workplace?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that is it's an extremely alarming thing. And Debbie and others have really been focusing on this for years, is the amount of data that's collected and how it's being used. And I've always put bills in to allow parents to opt out of their kids' data being collected. And we often bring this up, Nikki just brought it up at the state board 2 days ago, and I can't remember the subject, but we are injecting that discussion more frequently as far as what data is being collected and who keeps it and where it's, you know, how it's being used.
Well, the questions that they asked, it was my granddaughter in high school, and she's only 14 years old, and they asked her questions about her sexuality, how she felt about others, and it was a test, actually,
Right.
and all that information is put into a system.
Yeah. Well, there's
And-
even social emotional learning where and there's a pilot project where teachers are being asked, how likely is Johnny to steal? And then
Yeah.
you record this, and then where does that data go? You
Yeah,
know?
exactly. It could ruin
it's
your
really,
life.
it's called, if you hear SEL, social emotional learning,
Right.
that's the trigger, that should trigger you in a good way. That should really put your antenna up. One last question.
That's
I have
under
a question.
ESSA that they're doing that. That was mandated under the new federal No Child Left Behind law.
Yeah, speak a little louder.
I have a couple of things to say. Number one, that gentleman was talking about technology. The technologies that are out there have like a maximum of like a 3-year life cycle.
Right.
So you learn how to do, because I used to sell CAD myself personally, and it changes constantly, and everything does in computers. The second thing is, my kids went to probably the best schools in Michigan and the best colleges around the country, and they're under 40, and they're complete liberals. And I feel that is an outcome of the school districts. And if you look at the Board of Educations in all these different districts, the people that are on the boards, I would say the highest percentage are liberals. And they're out there espousing their ideas, they're shutting up the people that have voted them in. The people that are voting for these people don't even know what they're about. And I think we need to really work on finding out how we can let people in the communities know. Just because you like somebody doesn't mean they're going to be good on the school board.
Right.
Because I have a lot of friends on the school board, and I find them extremely liberal.
Right.
And I think that's really hurting.
Yeah. I understand. I mean, I would agree that I've been pushing for good school board, local school board. But, you know, the more that they can shrug their shoulders and say, well, Lansing's forcing us to do this, or,
You gotta get
you know,
rid
that's what happens a lot now, and I really would like to put more accountability so that they can really say, well, actually, we're doing this to the kids. And
Right.
at any rate, I know you got a full schedule, so thank you all for letting me.
Tom, thank you.